The stage lights of America's Got Talent glowed across the massive auditorium, filling the arena with warm gold that shimmered over thousands of eager faces. The crowd buzzed in excitement, whispering, laughing, waiting to see who would walk out next. The judges' table gleamed under the spotlights. Simon Cowell adjusting his shirt sleeve, Howie Mandel leaning back casually, Heidi Klum smiling brightly, and Sofia Vergara chatting softly with her co-judges. Then the backstage curtain shifted. A small, elderly man stepped into view. He wasn't dressed in anything flashy, no glitter jacket, no styled hair, no showbiz attitude. Instead, he wore an old button-down work shirt with faded blue stripes, the kind carpenters wear after years of use. His pants were slightly loose, held up by a simple belt, and on his feet were worn leather shoes that had clearly walked through countless days at a workshop. This was Mang Arturo, a Filipino carpenter who had flown all the way to America for the first time in his life, just for this moment. He hesitated before stepping onto the stage, clutching the edge of the curtain as if it were his lifeline. A stage assistant whispered, "You're up, sir," offering an encouraging smile. Mang Arturo inhaled deeply, steadied himself, and walked forward. The moment he appeared under the bright lights, the crowd quieted. Not in anticipation, but curiosity. He wasn't who they expected. He wasn't young, flashy, or looking like a superstar. He seemed fragile yet strong, like an old tree still standing tall despite years of storms. His back was slightly bent from decades of bending over wooden planks. His hands, though trembling slightly, were thick, rough, and scarred, each mark telling a story of labor, sacrifice, and survival. And his eyes, they held a gentle kindness mixed with deep nervousness. As he reached the center of the stage, he offered a shy smile. The echo of his shoes on the floor sounded louder than anything else in that moment. Simon leaned forward. "Hello, sir," he said warmly. "What's your name?" Mang Arturo cleared his throat. "Good evening, sir. Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice soft, thick with a Filipino accent. "My name is Arturo Santos." "How old are you, Arturo?" Heidi asked with a spark of interest. "I am 67 years old," he answered. The audience let out small murmurs of surprise. "And what do you do for a living?" Howie followed. Mang Arturo smiled shyly, lifting his hands slightly as if to show the proof. I am a carpenter. All my life I make tables, chairs, cabinets, anything people need." Sophia smiled warmly. "That's beautiful. And why are you here today?" Mang Arturo looked down for a moment. His breath trembled. When he looked up again, his eyes were moist, not from sadness, but from the weight of finally standing on a stage he had only seen on television. "I am here because I want to sing," he said quietly. "Even if my hands are old, my dream is still young." The audience softened instantly. A few people clapped gently, touched by the sincerity in his voice. Simon asked the question everyone wanted to know, "And why did you wait so long?" Mang Arturo chuckled softly, a humble, almost embarrassed sound. "Because life did not give me many choices," he explained. "I grow up poor in the Philippines. I start working when I am 12. I take care of my parents, then my own family, always working, always carving wood. Singing was my dream, but dreams don't feed hungry people." His words hit the audience like a quiet earthquake. The room fell completely silent, every person listening, every judge watching intently. He continued, "But when my children grow up, they told me, 'Papa, it's your turn.' They save money, and they tell me, 'Go to America, Papa. Try your dream.'" He looked down and swallowed hard. "So, I am here. This is my first time outside my country." The audience erupted into supportive applause. Some stood, others held their chest, feeling the emotion radiating from him. Simon softened visibly, the usual critical expression replaced by something gentler. "Well, Arturo," he said, "I am very glad you are here, and I'm sure your family is proud of you." Mang Arturo's shy smile returned, and he nodded. "Thank you, sir." "All right," Simon said, leaning back. "What will you be singing today?" Mang Arturo responded softly, "A song that reminds me of my wife." The audience awed, touched by the tenderness in his voice. He moved slightly to adjust the microphone. Up close, the camera captured the lines around his eyes, each one carved by years of hard work, laughter, tears, and resilience. The stage crew signaled that everything was ready. The music technician lifted his hand. The judges awaited the first note. The audience leaned forward. Mang Arturo closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and steadied his shaking hands. The lights dimmed, washing the background in soft amber tones that reflected his warm, gentle presence. In that quiet moment, before any note was sung, something filled the room, a sense of respect, admiration, and collective anticipation. Everyone knew they weren't just watching a performer, they were witnessing a dream decades in the making. As the first chords began to play, and the spotlight gently warmed his face, Mang Arturo finally opened his eyes. They shone with emotion, with gratitude, with a lifetime of stories waiting to be revealed. And then, with all the courage he could gather, he prepared to sing. The theater lights dimmed, leaving only a soft amber glow around Mang Arturo as he stood alone at the center of the AGT stage. The audience quieted, the judges leaned in, and the first gentle chords of his chosen song flowed through the speakers like a warm breeze. It was a classic ballad, one that carried tenderness, longing, and nostalgia. Mang Arturo took a slow breath, closing his eyes for just a moment. His fingers trembled slightly at his sides. The world felt still, as if every sound, every heartbeat, every whisper outside the stage had faded away. Then he opened his mouth. The first note floated out, barely louder than a whisper, yet filled with raw, trembling emotion. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the booming voice of a trained singer, but it held something more powerful. Decades of unspoken feelings, piled quietly inside a humble man who had never been given the chance to share them. The audience leaned forward, struck by the vulnerability in his voice. As he continued, something magical began to happen. His voice steadied. The softness gave way to a gentle richness, like an old record player warming up. The emotions clinging to each word traveled through the theater, touching strangers who had never met him, judges who had heard thousands of singers, and families watching from the back row. He sang like a man who had lived every lyric, a man who had loved deeply, lost things, sacrificed dreams, held on to hope. Every note was carved with the same dedication he gave to shaping wood, except now he was shaping hearts. The camera zoomed in on Simon. His eyes softened, his posture shifted. He was no longer the strict critic analyzing technique. He was a man listening with his heart, moved by the sincerity pouring out of an elderly carpenter who had spent his life giving others everything while giving himself nothing. Heidi held her hands together, her face glowing with admiration. Sophia's eyes were glossy. Even Howie, who rarely let emotions show visibly, leaned forward in awe. Halfway through the song, Mang Arturo's voice grew stronger. A newfound confidence bloomed within him. It was as though he realized, right there, in front of millions, that he belonged on this stage, that he deserved this moment. The screens behind him shifted from soft amber to a glowing golden landscape, trees lit by sunset, leaves drifting gently. It was as if the visuals themselves were celebrating his story. The audience felt it. The entire room vibrated with rising emotion. A woman in the front row wiped tears. A man further back wrapped an arm around his teenage daughter as they both watched this stranger pour his soul into each line. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Mang Arturo briefly looked up at the audience mid-song. His eyes glistened with unshed tears, and for just a second, it felt like he was singing to his wife, to his children, to the younger version of himself who once dreamed of this moment. That gaze shattered the room. People stood up, slowly at first, then wave after wave of rising bodies. Some held their chest to keep from crying out. Others raised their hands as if blessing him. The applause didn't erupt. It grew like a rising tide, slowly filling the room, mixing with the emotional swell of his voice. When he reached the high note, his voice broke. Not in the wrong way, but in the most human, most beautiful way possible. A crack of emotion echoed across the theater, making the words heavier, truer, unforgettable. Simon pressed his fingers to his lips, overwhelmed. The microphone caught the slight sound of his breath shaking. For a man known for his unbreakable composure, this was rare. Mang Arturo didn't just sing a song, he told a story without speaking it, a story of a young boy working with splintered wood instead of textbooks, a young father who put aside his dreams so his children could chase theirs, a husband who sang while carving furniture late at night just to feel alive, and now, an old man finally living the dream he thought he had lost long ago. As the final chorus approached, the music swelled, the lights brightened, and Mang Arturo lifted his chin, singing the last lines with every ounce of remaining strength inside him. His voice wasn't flawless. It was better. It was true. And that truth wrapped around the entire theater like a warm hug, pulling tears from eyes that had sworn not to cry. When he delivered his final note, he held it for a moment, not to show off, but because he didn't want the moment to end. No one did. He closed his eyes gently as the last vibration of his voice drifted into silence. Then everything exploded. The audience rose as one, the sound of thousands of hands colliding echoing like thunder. People cheered, screamed, cried. Someone shouted, "You deserve this!" Another cried out, "Go, Papa!" A group of Filipinos in the back waved tiny Philippine flags proudly. The judges stood up almost instantly. Heidi clapped with tears in her eyes. Sophia had her hand over her heart. Howie nodded in disbelief. And Simon stood slowly, his expression soft and deeply moved. His eyes glistened, not in the flashy way of television emotion, but in the quiet, honest way that only happens when something truly unexpected touches the soul. Mang Arturo, overwhelmed, lowered his head. His shoulders shook. He tried to bow, but the tears escaping his eyes made him wipe his face instead. He was crying, not from sadness, but from the realization that for the first time in his life, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't just a carpenter. He was an artist. The applause continued endlessly, refusing to stop, refusing to let him leave the moment. This wasn't just a performance. It was a victory, a release, a rebirth of a dream long buried beneath sawdust and responsibility, and the judges knew exactly what had to happen next. The applause still thundered across the arena long after Mang Arturo finished his final note. The entire theater was on its feet. Judges, audience members, families, strangers. Every soul in the room standing in honor of the elderly Filipino carpenter who had just poured his heart into a song. Golden lights washed over the crowd, shimmering like reflections on a river. Mang Arturo stood at center stage, overwhelmed, shoulders trembling. Tears rolled down his cheeks freely, unashamed and unrestrained. He covered his mouth with one calloused hand, trying to steady himself, but his breath still shook from emotion. For a full 30 seconds the applause didn't slow, it only grew louder. Some audience members were chanting his name, others simply cried and clapped, unable to speak. It felt less like a talent show and more like a moment of worldwide celebration, an acknowledgement of a man's lifetime of sacrifice and the beauty of finally receiving something back. Slowly, Simon Cowell stepped forward from the judges' table. His expression wasn't the guarded, analytical face the world was used to seeing. Instead, he looked human, vulnerable, moved. There was a softness in his eyes that only appeared in truly rare moments. He adjusted his microphone and waited for the applause to fade enough for him to speak. The audience sensed the importance of the moment and quieted, though many still sniffled through tears. Simon took a breath. Then he said, voice low and emotional, "Arturo, I don't even know where to begin." Mang Arturo lifted his head, still wiping tears. His eyes met Simon's with a mix of gratitude, disbelief, and awe. He had watched Simon on TV for years, never imagining that one day the man who judged the world's biggest talents would look at him like this. Simon continued, "Sometimes someone walks on this stage and reminds all of us why we do this show. You did that tonight." The audience erupted in soft applause, nodding, murmuring in agreement. Simon's voice wavered, just slightly, but enough to show he was genuinely touched. "There was something in your voice, something real, something honest. You didn't just sing, you shared your heart with us, and I felt every word." Mang Arturo pressed his hand to his chest, humbled beyond belief. Thank you so much," he whispered. Simon stepped back slightly and looked around the audience, as if asking silently, "Did you feel it too?" Heidi nodded, tears glistening. Sophia placed her hand over her heart. Howie wiped his eye discreetly. Then, without breaking his emotional expression, Simon turned his gaze back to Mang Arturo. "And Arturo," he said softly, "I want the whole world to hear you." The audience felt it coming, and they held their breath. Simon's hand reached toward the center of the judges' table. Time slowed. Mang Arturo's eyes widened. The crowd gasped. The stage crew froze in anticipation. And then, boom! Simon slammed the golden buzzer with a force driven by pure emotion. A blinding burst of golden light shot upward from the judge's table as the arena exploded into screams, cheers, and disbelief. The first pieces of golden confetti burst from the ceiling, drifting toward the stage like shimmering drops of sunlight. Mang Arturo's knees buckled. For a moment he couldn't move. He couldn't speak. He could barely breathe. It was as if his entire life, every hardship, every sacrifice, every dream he buried to raise his family, came rushing back in a single overwhelming wave. Golden confetti poured down like rain, swirling around him in a sparkling storm. Some stuck to his hair, others floated gently onto his shoulders, turning him into a glowing, unforgettable silhouette beneath the spotlight. He fell to his knees, hands covering his face, sobbing openly, not from sadness but from the pure, indescribable joy of finally being seen, finally being heard, finally being valued. People in the audience cried harder at the sight. Backstage, crew members covered their mouths, emotional. Arturo's family, who had flown in secretly to surprise him, sobbed behind the curtain, hugging each other tightly. His daughter whispered, "Papa, you did it," while his son wiped tears from his eyes. Simon stood up and walked away from the judge's table, making his way toward the stage. The other judges followed, smiling, clapping, moved by what they had just witnessed. As Simon climbed the steps, the confetti continued to fall like golden snow. He approached Mang Arturo, still on his knees, and gently helped him stand. When their eyes met, Simon placed a hand on Arturo's shoulder and said in a voice thick with emotion, "You deserve this moment, every second of it." Mang Arturo cried harder, leaning in as Simon pulled him into a warm, sincere hug. The crowd roared, cameras flashed, confetti danced around them like sparks of magic. Sophia and Heidi joined, offering hugs and words of admiration. Heidi said, "You touched all our hearts, you're incredible." Sophia added, "This is one of the most beautiful performances we've had." Howie approached with a smile, saying, "This is what AGT is about. Real people with real stories." The music swelled, uplifting, triumphant, emotional. Mang Arturo stood in the center of the stage, surrounded by the swirling gold. He looked up, letting the confetti fall on his face, smiling through tears. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like just a carpenter. He felt like someone whose story mattered, someone who had inspired millions. He raised his hands slightly, as if embracing the whole world, and whispered, "For my family, for my wife, for everyone who still dreams." The audience cheered even louder, chanting his name, waving flags, celebrating a man who had shown them that dreams do not have expiration dates. The camera captured one final shot, a breathtaking image of Mang Arturo standing under the golden rain, eyes closed, face lifted, heart full. It was a moment that would live on not just in AGT history, but in the hearts of everyone who watched him reclaim his long-lost dream.